Welcome to Goldfinch Bio's interview series, The Feeder. We're speaking with people impacted by kidney disease and a wide range of experts who are driving change, innovation, and hope in the kidney space. In this episode, Dr. Liron Walsh, Vice President of Translational and Clinical Nephrology at Goldfinch Bio, welcomes Dr. Kirk Campbell, an Associate Professor of Medicine, Director of the Nephrology Fellowship Program, and the Vice Chair for Diversity and Inclusion at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai.
Dr. Kirk Campbell, welcome to The Feeder. Thanks so much for taking time out of your hectic schedule to join us today. I've had the pleasure of knowing you for 15 years now, give or take. I'm excited to introduce you to our listeners and in particularly highlight your exciting work in the nephrology space.
Thanks so much, Liron. Pleasure to be here.
So to kick things off, I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about your background and your current role, or I should say roles, that you have at Mount Sinai today. And I'm very interested in the career trajectory. So where you started and where you are today and what's next.
Well, we'll see what's next. But right now, I'm the Director of the Nephrology Fellowship Program here at Mount Sinai, where I'm also an Associate Professor. I'm a physician scientist, so my interest is in glomerular disease, that rare proteinuric kidney disease space that's getting a lot of attention, both in and outside of academia. I have some other responsibilities here as well, including being the Vice Chair for Diversity and Inclusion Department of Medicine, where I'm active in overseeing the educational, recruitment, and other health disparities initiatives that are important to Sinai in achieving health equity. So I did my nephrology fellowship training here at Sinai, as did you. I know we overlapped back then when you were a fellow. Prior to that, I was an internal medicine resident at Yale and I went to medical school at University of Connecticut. So I've been interested in podocyte cell biology for the last 15 years or so. I've been pretty active in that space with translational research as well, involving clinical trials and novel therapeutic drug development.
Great, yeah, and I've obviously enjoyed getting to know you better over the years as well. What drew you to nephrology? Why the interests? I mean, podocytes are a specific part of the nephrologists, I guess, but what makes you very interested in nephrology and then even more so in podocytes?
It's a good question when we often reflect on what draws us to a specific specialty. For me in nephrology, actually, it was far removed from podocytes that kind of sparked that initial interest. It was really the first year of medical school with renal physiology, acid base, sodium balance. These were interesting, learning about all these fascinating channels in the tubule, right? I think eventually when we got to the third year of medical school and were able to connect some of that basic physiology to actual clinical problems that patients faced, it was even more exciting. But I didn't become interested in podocyte biology until nephrology fellowship years. I think a lot of people do internal medicine as a bridge to other specialties where they really try to find what interests them. And for me, it was really between cardiology and nephrology. But I think having role models in nephrology, really, again, being able to stay connected to the whole body, multiple organ systems, not really losing track of general medicine knowledge is what attracted me to nephrology in particular. And then eventually, the glomerular disease space through various mentors, including my research mentor, Peter Mundell, I got to really appreciate the unmet clinical need in that proteinuric kidney disease space, right? We're really using a lot of repurposed drugs and need to do a better job in getting safe, effective therapy to our patients.
Yeah, no, I agree. I had a similar, I guess, experience in terms of enabling the rest of the body to or maintaining, I think, that ability to think about the rest of the body as we considered the kidney as either the victim of multiple diseases. So, and acid base as well, certainly sparked my interest. But you highlighted a key point, I think, in the bringing new therapeutics as opposed to repurposing drugs. And, one question that we have is, why do you think there is or has been previously an innovation gap in the nephrology space? And what strides are being made in order to overcome that?
Nephrology traditionally has suffered from a low level of activity in the clinical trial space. I think, something that we're not necessarily proud of is the fact that among the medical specialties, we've had the smallest number of clinical trials, or a low level of new drug development as a result. But that's changing, right? I think in the last several years, and I think in the proteinuric disease space, glomerular disease space in particular, we're getting to a lot of molecular pathogenesis, precision-based approaches where attractive targets are being uncovered. And we're seeing very robust trial activity in FSGS, IgA nephropathy, and other related spaces that are quite promising. So I think as science advances and we start applying some of the cutting edge, state of the art approaches that have worked well in other fields, such as oncology, for example, I think that we're in a good place. And then there are challenges with the clinical trials infrastructure, really training the next generation of trialists and clinical investigators, ensuring that this rare disease space, which is really what we're in, has the appropriate resources, right? And that not all the attention in nephrology goes to the more common disorders, which of course have a significant burden, like diabetic disease, hypertensive disease, and some of the electrolyte abnormalities like hyperkalemia, anemia. Those all deserve attention, but we have to really get to enough sufficient attention, right, at the high disease burden, more rare clinical disorders. But, I think quite from a fascinating perspective, it is happening.
So I'm curious, you mentioned sort of the rare disease initiative in a way, or bringing that forward. In your view, does understanding the pathophysiology of more rare disorders, does that help understand the potential for new therapeutics or new ways of classifying disease and perhaps the more prevalent diseases like diabetic nephropathy or hypertensive nephropathy?
Yes, no doubt. So one example of how we can reclassify and approach some of these rare kidney disorders in a more meaningful way is the example of FSGS, focal sclerosis, where traditionally we've looked at this as a histologic cluster, right? Where patients, regardless of what their underlying etiology, which can be 30, 40 different underlying etiologies, different pathways being activated or downregulated, causing the same histologic pattern of injury that we call focal sclerosis, right? And that's traditionally how we've approached this for decades, but now we're realizing that patients really, again, have this heterogeneous presentation, heterogeneous underlying etiologies that we can uncover with advanced molecular techniques, histologic, urinary, serologic biomarkers, genetic contributors, whether they're monogenetic disease-causing variants or ones that increase susceptibility, we can probably target, a lot of these underlying causes. And so it's led to a rethink of the classification, right, of these disorders. And perhaps there are pathways that are shared between FSGS and diabetic disease, for example, where a patient may benefit from the same drug, independent of whether they have, histologic features of diabetic disease or focal sclerosis, and those overlap, which we know. So I think the picture is complex, but getting in a way a little bit more clear as we take a more precision-based approach.
And do you think then, for instance, I think about APOL1 as an example in many ways of mutations which lead to FSGS. And now we are understanding that actually the impact is a lot broader. What we'd call hypertensive kidney disease in an African-American population may actually be related to those APOL1 risk alleles, or sickle cell disease, or lupus. I mean, it's very interesting how these molecular pathways or genetic underlying drivers can be involved in one disorder, perhaps more predominantly, but then be expanded into other ones as well.
Yes, the phenome-wide associations that we're seeing with some of these gene variants is quite fascinating. And again, it's an example of how we can use molecular technology diagnostics combined with harnessing the EMR and digital pathology to really get a better picture of clinical outcomes. Certainly the example of APOL1 is quite fascinating. And there are more to come, right? But this actually opens up a number of possibilities, right? There may be a time where we integrate biopsy findings, or where they don't exist, we can use the results of genetic testing combined with other predictors to identify the best treatment option for patients. But yes, I think the APOL1 story is interesting, and I know that there are a number of groups developing APOL1 targeted therapy. So that certainly is an advancement.
Yeah, I think it's an important one, and the discovery of that, I think, opens perhaps the door to thinking about other genetic causes of FSGS that can be applied to other more prevalent diseases, or reclassifying those based on those molecular sort of disorders. So I want to ask specifically about your work a little bit, Kirk. Can you describe your work and where you think it's going to lead towards?
Yeah, so I actually started off really looking at mediators of podocyte survival, and as we know, the podocyte is like the key target cell for injury across the spectrum of a number of proteinuric disorders. These cells are terminally differentiated, they have a very limited capacity to regenerate in the face of injury from gene mutations, hemodynamic stress, infection. Even with the COVID pandemic, there's a COVID nephropathy with podocytes potentially involved. So we've worked a lot to understand how these cells become injured and what factors may drive survival and could be therapeutic in the context of disease. So we've identified several molecules, including the hippo signaling pathway protein YAP, which mediates podocyte survival. Other molecules like dendrin are pro-injury, and more recently, a targetable biomarker plasminogen, which is increased in the urine of patients with biopsy-proven glomerular disease. And we think that this could also be a potential target. Of course, we use plasminogen inhibitor clinically, amiloride. I mean, it has sort of some efficacy in patients with nephrosis, but that's sort of one way that we could potentially translate some of these findings. And of course, I'm very interested in the clinical trial space, right? So, I've been fortunate to work at Sinai, where we have a large, diverse patient population. And we've successfully recruited patients for various trials in FSGS, IgA nephropathy, and membranous nephropathy, including some investigator-initiated studies to better understand the mechanism of agents in development, or those that are approved as well.
Yeah, that's great. You mentioned COVID, sort of nephropathy.
Right.
That's sort of it's an emerging sort of phenomenon. What are you working in that, and can you perhaps describe that, given how relevant that is today?
Oh, there's so much to unpack with COVID and how it's affected the kidney. Of course, COVID affects multiple organ systems, and probably one of the first experiences that we had in our group with COVID. Of course, we're in the middle of the pandemic when it first started peaking in New York City last March to April. But we did see some patients with a collapsing glomerulopathy associated with COVID infection, including, one patient who didn't have a prior history of kidney disease at all, completely normal kidney function. And we've seen various case reports of patients with high-risk APOL1 alleles who are susceptible to COVID-associated glomerulopathy. So there may be an interaction between APOL1 variants and coronavirus infection that causes this really severe phenotype patients who some of them end up being dialysis dependent, and it's quite sad. So we've described some of those findings. Our colleagues here have done a lot of work on the acute kidney injury phase associated with COVID, which was again more significant back in the spring than we're seeing in this current second wave, a little bit less acute kidney injury. More recently, Mount Sinai has started this COVID Center of Excellence, right, to follow patients who've recovered from COVID, but may have, we call these long haul symptoms, right? So this post-acute symptomatology, usually defined as having symptoms that persist more than 3 weeks, right? After having the COVID infection. And again, multiple organs are affected, but there is an entity that we're seeing, right? COVID-associated chronic kidney disease, right? What does that look like? So our lab actually has been, because we have worked in developing a biorepository for kidney disease, we've also taken on the responsibility of helping to process samples for patients followed in that COVID Center of Excellence. So blood and urine samples that will be available to really try to better understand why these patients have these long-term sequelae, who's most at risk, and hopefully develop interventions that could be successful in helping these patients.
Yeah, I think that's entirely a formidable effort, and I think only with yourself and other groups moving it forward, we'll make a difference sort of with that sense of collaboration. I'm interested in hearing about how you consider partnering, I think, with biotech or sort of industry to bring not just the clinical studies to sort of Mount Sinai, but even innovation forward in the space. How do you view that?
Yeah, and I think it's a great question, how academia can better partner with industry. I think both groups need each other, is my personal view. And, I think the entities complement each other in many ways. In academia, you talk to folks who are doing exceptional science and maybe have aspirations of identifying targets that are amenable to therapeutic drug development. They're full of ideas, right? But they don't necessarily have the resources or the know-how to translate their ideas into a product that could reach patients, right? So I think in many ways that partnership is absolutely essential. And there's so many examples of where this has worked well, right? Not just in the nephrology space, but of course, many other fields in medicine, including a few partnerships that I'm familiar with here at Sinai in the Fabry disease space and depression space. Dean, had a recently approved drug for treating resistant depression. Mm-hmm. So I think that this can happen quite nicely and should happen more, in my view, in the nephrology space.
Oh yeah, I agree. I think through partnership, we can really bring forward sort of innovative medicines. And I think it's a complementary effort in many ways from biotech and pharma and the academic sort of side of things. And I think at least my own personal perspective in a way is that the relationship has evolved in many ways in terms of academics sort of on one side, industry on the other side, and never the two shall sort of meet or discuss. But we do see a lot more, cross-pollination, I guess, now.
Absolutely. And again, we do need to see more of this. And I think that's being supported on both sides in a way that, as you've alluded to, hasn't always existed.
Correct. Yeah. So it's interesting in that sense, but it's important. So I'm glad we're making progress sort of there in working together. I want to switch gears a little bit. It is Black History Month, and at Goldfinch, we've been highlighting the impact of kidney disease on African Americans, as well as some of the racial disparities that exist within academic medicine and nephrology, sort of in particular. I'm interested, sort of in your perspective and on those two issues, and perhaps touching upon back to APOL1 a little bit, how that has changed the perception, I think, of what may have been a disease that people consider to be of African American sort of origin in a way because of lifestyle or behavior, but now it's shifted really towards actually, this is a genetic disorder. I'm interested in your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think there certainly is a better appreciation for some of the genetic underpinnings of kidney disease and the etiology of this burden of kidney disease. And again, thinking about APOL1, which has a very high association, of course, with non-diabetic kidney disease and patients of African ancestry. At the same time that we are happy that we have identified this major contributor for our disease risk, we've also been pushed to confront some of the other disparities in managing patients with kidney disease, successfully enrolling patients in clinical trials. So engaging patients who have this high risk for disease is not a trivial matter, right? And I think it's pushed the field to go back to the drawing board and say, all right, how can we best, do qualitative research, community-based, participatory research, having patients feel empowered and be at the center of everything that we're doing, because there is still a sense of distrust, right, between the community and academic centers, right, based on some of the things that have happened historically in the U.S. and where we do have some work to do. But I think it is important, especially given the increased attention as well in the past year on social and racial justice issues around the pandemic, where we saw disproportionately patients from underserved communities being hospitalized, having increased mortality. We of course again have seen how the genetic underpinnings could drive more severe disease progression. So I think it's been sobering, but it is complex. I mean, you've alluded to, race, ethnicity, but there's also, poverty, right? That and the social determinants of health that drive significant outcomes. APOL1 is fascinating because even now, we still don't necessarily know exactly how APOL1 mutations cause podocyte injury and cause, focal sclerosis or hypertensive disease. The association is high, but, most people think there's a second hit. Well, what is that second hit?
Sure.
We've seen, a lot of data on environmental causes, right? Is diet an issue as well? Is access to healthy foods, clean air? I mean, just other things, right? That affect health. So I think it's sobering. We certainly have seen a lot of advances, but certainly more work to be done.
It seems like a daunting problem.
Yeah.
Perhaps, Kirk, can you provide any insights as to how you think we can move it forward so that there isn't a disproportionate impact of diseases, and those of the kidney in particular, on minorities?
Yeah, no, I think that there are some solutions that have been discussed in moving the needle. And, I think it's nice to see a lot of energy in academic centers, around recruiting a diverse workforce, which is important, right? But diversity is just one piece of it, right? It's inclusion, it's equity. It's really, again, successfully engaging communities, bringing communities in at every level of decision-making, right? Around how you administer clinical care, how you collect demographic data on patients to track outcomes by demographic groups, how you design research protocols, right? How you message approved therapy to communities of color. I mean, I think these are valuable areas that we've learned. And, I think in some of the roles that I have, I've benefited from talking to some of these stakeholders, and it's been quite enlightening, right? The same concerns are raised or viewed quite differently by people in and outside of medicine. So I think just inviting the right people to the discussion, right? Getting diverse viewpoints is a start. It's a start, but then also you need to take action. But I think we're not even at all times doing the basics, but that works well. So I think the clinical infrastructure and clinical care is better when you have stakeholders from diverse groups involved, and you more successfully can recruit to clinical trials and advance your development process for pharmaceutical marketing and other perspective, when again the communities that you want to reach are well represented, feel respected, and are listened to.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So it sounds like it's part about sort of outreach, having the right people around the table, having a deep sort of conversation, and understanding what different patient populations from different ethnic backgrounds or racial backgrounds sort of need in order to get sort of the right care. I imagine that a lot of that is what you consider as the vice chair of diversity and inclusion at Mount Sinai. Can you tell us a little bit more about that role, and perhaps also what it means on the academic side, and how you think about diversity and inclusion in the academic nephrology space?
Right. No, I'd be happy to speak about some of the diversity and inclusion work that's happening in the department. So, I think that, a lot of the work starts off with, again, having a diverse group of individuals in the workforce. So, a lot of focus on recruitment at the trainee level, residency, fellowship, and faculty, staff as well. And making sure, again, that in all that we do, we have community involvement. There are some active community boards that actually advise Mount Sinai on issues related to access to care and the outcomes. So that's one piece of the work that we do. And when that diverse group of individuals are here working, we want to ensure that we highlight the values, right, that department and institution have that are important. So this involves, a lot of implicit bias training, anti-racism training, but not just in a didactic form, but in an engaging form where there is a lot of discussion and back and forth, and an appreciation, again, for folks not really being in a bubble, but understanding that all team members need to be treated with respect, and also patience, and having that patient-centered communication in all that we do, right? We've seen a lot of the recent legislation around patient access to their records, for example, where patients now will be able to read physician notes and have full access. This is groundbreaking and a dramatic change, and will, of course, require physicians to be more cautious, right, about how they communicate with each other about patients and patient outcomes. But it also is a lot of transparency, right, where patients, again, are pushed to the center of the care that they receive. And I think that's quite important. So we do interact with a lot of other departments as well in their work. And it's kind of nice to see, for example, trading ideas with the OBGYN department and some of their work in maternal fetal outcomes, right? By zip code and tracking, some of the maternal mortality and fetal outcomes that we can extrapolate those practices to medicine to track how we're doing with diabetes management and blood pressure targets in our primary care clinics. And I think it's kind of fascinating and fulfilling, to work on all these initiatives in the department.
Yeah, I think that's great and extremely important. And what I'm wondering now actually is, so clinical research, clinical responsibilities, fellowship program director, how do you make it happen? I think someone trying to emulate, Dr. Kirk Campbell, what are they in for?
Well, I didn't plan for everything to work out. It's funny. I mean, if I had to look back 20 years ago, this was not a master plan, but, opportunities do arise. And I think, some of the advice that I give to fellows and junior faculty would be to think carefully about some of the things you get into, and make sure you enjoy the work that you do, right? Because it has to be fulfilling in the end. And I've been fortunate to really enjoy all these responsibilities, right? And I love working with fellows and trainees and students. Performing biomedical research is crucially important, and advancing health equity. I mean, what bigger ideal could there be? So these are all synergistic roles. And one thing that's great is that I'm working in a great institution with very talented people, right? So there are a lot of things that can be delegated. and a lot of work that I also do myself. So it's that balance that you strike for time management that makes it all worthwhile.
So, and what gets you to come to the office, in the morning? Is it the lab work, the clinical work, the fellowship director responsibilities? What gets you in the door?
What gets me in the door really depends on the day, right? If you'd followed up with me, President's Day weekend, that long weekend was a weekend call, which was very busy, and it was all about that, right? So it's a good example because I did nothing else for 4 days. Didn't think at all about research or anything, right? The focus was on busy clinical service, taking care of some very sick patients. But then a few days later, there was a nice transition, right, to an NIH study section, right, participating in grant review for some really cutting edge research that was also quite fulfilling. So a lot of it is focusing on the task at hand, and that's kind of what we try to do as a part of the team.
So you mentioned the clinical work and how important that is for you and the focus on those patients over that President's Day weekend. How does the clinical work inform your research endeavors? I mean, how do you tie those two together?
The clinical work is very important for informing some of the research endeavors that I have and certainly discuss with my group. I think that's really where we get to fully appreciate the unmet clinical need. And I keep coming back to FSGS, and for the longest time, I could not understand why we're giving so many patients immunosuppression, right? I said, what is the immunologic basis for this disease? And I never got a sufficient answer. And that may have been part of the motivation for me to work more closely on this. It turns out that some patients may have an immunologic basis, but maybe not all, right? And kind of distinguishing those groups is what makes this kind of fulfilling. So still now, we have these discussions with colleagues, being a large academic division. People have different approaches to treating these rare disorders, and we have a very robust discussion about where the field should go, what the optimal approach should be. And I think that is what makes this all worth it. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great. So it's clear that what you observe and use clinically impacts how you think about sort of your research and what that focus sort of might be. And so I think that's sort of great, and really the way that my view it should be. So applaud you for bringing that together in one cohesive sort of way. I think the last question, Kirk, for you is, if you could have a crystal ball, where do you see the landscape of kidney therapeutics in the next, 5 to 10 years? What would you like to see?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the kidney landscape, it's obviously an exciting time. We cannot deny that. I think we're on the cusp of having approved therapy for FSGS, IgA nephropathy, as two disorders with significant unmet clinical need approved in the next few years. And I think, hopefully that will spur a wave of innovation, right, around the kidney space that we haven't seen in a very long time. I think we need to be an innovative specialty. I think genetics, molecular diagnostics, other capabilities are really driving that. I think that one step that we will likely need to get to is decide how we optimize therapy with some of these combinations, right, of drugs that are looking promising. We have to be mindful of how SGLT2 inhibitors are significantly altering the landscape, right? Where traditionally we've relied on renin-angiotensin system blockade, and now we have this other drug class initially developed for diabetic patients, really reducing albuminuria and the progression of kidney disease. So how we can best combine agents to improve clinical outcomes is sort of the next step. And of course, we need to successfully recruit for a lot of the ongoing clinical trials, again, to get the benefit while better stratifying these disorders by pathway, precision genomics, and so on, to classify them properly, right, from a clinical treatment perspective, but also from a drug development standpoint too.
Kirk, thank you for your time today. It's been actually a really amazing conversation. Your focus on the kidney is super important, as well as the impact that you're having on Mount Sinai, the community there, the importance of inclusion and diversity in both clinical studies, academic medicine, patient care. It's amazing and humbling to really see. I think if I were to sum up in one word, it's really this patient focus that you think about throughout your research and clinical endeavors. That's really, really impressive. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Leon. Great talking to you.